The evening began the same way it always did, boots on, world loading, the familiar hum of Minecraft music stretching across the menu screen. I thought I was here to pass a few hours, nothing more. Just blocks, torches, and the slow rhythm of placing one thing after another until my mind loosened its knots. But as soon as the world settled into view, I noticed the river had carved itself a little differently. Not broken, not glitched, just different. The current pushed slower, as if even the water had decided to rest tonight. I followed the bank, the sound of rushing fading until all I heard was my footsteps crunching against gravel. I wondered if the game was trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten in the real world, something I'd ignored for too long. Still, I kept walking. My builds waited ahead, the cabin tucked into birch trees, the lanterns strung across fences, the half-finished bridge. Each block held a trace of my earlier moods, some rushed, some careful, some crooked and fixed later when I wasn't tired anymore. And when I stopped outside the cabin door, hand hovering, I realized I wasn't logging in just to play. I was here because I needed something this world had always been willing to give, but I hadn't slowed down enough to ask. Inside, the fire flickered brighter than usual. I stepped closer, warmth crawling up my arms. Something about tonight told me the world itself had decided to speak. I sat by the fire for longer than I meant to, just listening to the crackle. Outside, the faint wind rustled through birch leaves, and I could almost swear it matched my breathing. I pulled open the chest by the door, the one I always kept full of small things that didn't seem important until they suddenly were: extra torches, spare wood, a fishing rod half-used, and a compass that never pointed anywhere useful. The rod called to me, though I hadn't fished here in months. I walked down to the pier I'd built back when I first joined this world. The planks were weathered now, edges softened from countless times I'd sprinted across them. I tossed the line into the still river and waited. The bobber floated lazy, refusing to hurry. I smiled at the thought. This game was better at teaching patience than any book or podcast I'd ever tried. The first catch was a salmon, pixelated and shining even under the blocky moonlight. But what surprised me wasn't the fish, it was how light my chest felt pulling it in. As if the act itself had reeled in something I hadn't realized I lost. Ease, maybe. The world outside Minecraft never gave me this kind of silence, the kind that let thoughts settle instead of piling up. Another fish tugged, then another. I gathered them without caring what I'd do with them. What mattered was the rhythm: cast, wait, tug, pull. Every loop was its own small victory. But as dawn edged its way into the sky, painting clouds with slow strokes, I realized I didn't want to stay by the pier forever. The cabin, the forest, the unfinished bridge, they were calling me to walk further. The path to the bridge was lined with lanterns I'd hung weeks ago, their glow softening as the sun climbed higher. When I built them, I thought they were just decoration. Now, stepping between them felt like walking down a memory lane lit from both ends, past work reminding me where I'd been, future builds waiting where I was headed. The bridge itself was half finished, spanning the river with awkward dignity. Only half. The bridge waited with the patience of projects that don't mind being unfinished. I ran my hand along the last placed plank, felt the tiny misalignments that only I would ever notice. In the rush of my week, this bridge had become a mirror, half done, good intentions stacked beside excuses. I opened my inventory and set a neat row of spruce slabs on the hotbar, then crouched placed the next span while the river murmured underneath. The rhythm returned: step, place, breathe, step, place, breathe. A single drown drifted close, arms swaying like seaweed, then gave up and sank back into the green. Even the mob seemed reluctant to interrupt. By the time I reached the far bank, the railings still gapped, but the walkway held. I stood in the middle and looked both ways. Behind me, the cabin; ahead, a meadow where I'd always meant to plant bees and wildflowers. I pictured the hives lined like little libraries, each one humming with its own soft book. The thought warmed me. I set torches, not for danger, but for memory, tiny suns that would remember for me when I forgot. A ping broke the quiet. H popped online. "You're early." I smiled at the chat window. We'd met in a queue months ago and stayed for the shared tempo. No speedruns, No grinding competitions, just two people putting shape to gentle evenings. Bridge day, I typed. And maybe bees, H replied. Bees deserve a bridge. Everything slow does. Their words landed like the first drop of rain before a kind storm. I placed one more slab and let my avatar sit, legs dangling over hexed water that didn't know how to hurry. The farm meadow flickered with seeds of possibility. So did something in me, making room. And the day, cooperative as grass, seemed ready to grow where I would finally plant it. H arrived wearing the same scuffed leather armor as last week, a running joke neither of us had bothered to end. They tossed me a stack of flowering azalea leaves and a sign, then stood at the bridge's midpoint as if measuring whether it could carry the weight of a good idea. Railings? They asked. Or do we trust careful feet? Railings, I said, but I built them thin, open enough to see the water's conversation. We worked side by side without filling the air. The quiet wasn't empty, it had texture, like wool freshly sheared. Every few minutes H typed a single word. Nice, clean, almost. Words that landed like nods from across a room. When the last fence post clicked into place, the bridge finally looked like an answer instead of a question. I placed the azalea leaves in soft drifts along the entrance, and the path exhaled. We crossed to the meadow together and checked the soil I'd half-hoed months ago, tilled squares waiting like unsent letters. I planted poppies, cornflowers, and the occasional sunflower that insisted on facing the same way. Bees would come when they were ready. H framed a small clearing with moss and set the sign. Slow Lane. I laughed, because that's what we'd built without naming it, a piece of world where urgency had politely removed its shoes. As shadows stretched, we followed a gentle routine: chop a little wood, fix a chipped stair, feed the cows, let the night pass without forcing meaning into it. Before logging off, H wrote another line on the sign's second page. If you're rushing, take one more breath, then two. I read it twice, the way you do when something kind feels slightly illegal to accept. When H said goodnight, I lingered on the bridge. The lanterns wore halos in the growing dark. Somewhere out of sight, I could hear bees that hadn't quite arrived yet. Or maybe it was only the river, promising patience if I promised to listen tomorrow. Morning found me gathering honeycombs from a wandering trader's abandoned stand. 2 emeralds for a start. I should have earned slower, but sometimes mercy arrives as a bargain. I crafted the first hive and set it under an oak that knew how to hold shade. The box looked almost bashful, a little house waiting for tenants with golden jackets. I planted more flowers, then another hive, and the air began to feel expectant, as if the world had swallowed a note and was about to hum. In real life, my messages had stacked up like uncrafted planks. I answered a few between tasks, fingers tapping apologies I'd meant to send days ago. Back in game, I moved the chests from the cabin's wall to a tidy row, labeled with the kind of optimism that always makes me smile. Wood plenty, stone enough, food better. The brackets did a lot of work. I cooked the salmon from last night and ate in view of the meadow, the taste description flashing like a simple poem. Tasty. Block food and honest labels, it was enough. A soft buzz rose, and then another. The first bee drifted in from the birch line, fat and curious, looping figure eights as if interviewing the flowers. A second joined, bouncing gently like laughter you can hear without the joke. I stood perfectly still. The game didn't require it, I did. They sampled the cornflowers, dusted themselves in yellow, and waddled back to the hive with the diligence of people carrying tea to a friend. Watching them, something in my chest softened and took a seat. H reappeared just long enough to place a lectern on the bridge. For notes, they typed. For anyone passing. I set a blank book and titled it Slow Craft. The first page stayed empty on purpose. Some spaces need to be held before they get filled. I closed the book, left it there, and promised the bridge I'd try to keep earning days like this. The bees slipped into their box, the meadow leaned into noon, and I felt the rare kind of quiet that still moves. It felt like standing in a doorframe between 2 rooms and realizing you don't have to choose right now. The next few evenings braided together, a few rails added to the cliff path, a sprout coaxed into a tree, A small dock extended by 4 more logs because 4 is a gentle number. I replaced my iron pick with a fresh one, renamed Kind Work, and smiled at the way the anvil rang like a bell that blessed ordinary tasks. I kept forgetting to chase diamonds. I kept remembering to fix little things. The server's day-night cycle learned my heartbeat and matched it, or maybe I finally matched it back. When storms rolled in, I let them. Rain tapped the roof like a patient teacher. I crafted a music box and 1 disc, set it near the window, and let the soft track turn the room into a memory I hadn't lived yet. Brought over mangrove roots for texture, then built a bench at the meadow's edge that faced not the best view but the truest, the bridge, the hives, the path that chose usefulness over spectacle. We sat on it together and watched bees draw slow constellations between flowers as if reminding us of names we could remember without trying. I wrote the first words in the bridge book. If you came here because the world asked for too much today, take 2 lanterns and a loaf. I tucked both items in the barrel beside the lectern and felt a small rush, like generosity had snuck up and tapped my shoulder. Added, return them when you can or don't. We trust you. I thought of all the places that had never offered trust and how my body had learned to hunch without noticing. Then I built the path straighter, as if my spine had taken notes. Before logging off, I walked the riverbank in a mosaic of torchlight and drizzle. Somewhere between the cabin and the bridge, I realized the game had become less of an escape and more of a rehearsal. I was practicing leaving room, the way you leave a seat beside you for someone who might need it. The water kept its soft argument with the shore, and I let it win. Tomorrow, I decided, I would finally visit the old mine shaft and carry this quiet underground. I packed for the mine shaft like someone choosing what thoughts to bring into a hard conversation. Torches, bread, spare pick, a stack of oak for makeshift stairs. The entrance yawned under a cliff I'd always meant to terrace but never did, its mouth curtained by vines that had quietly won. I broke only what I needed and let the rest drape back like a promise to return. The first tunnel was familiar, the kind of straight line you dig when you're chasing something bright and forget to notice the dark being so polite about moving aside. I set torches every 8 paces, an even heartbeat on stone. Lapis appeared in a soft blue blush, like a sky trying to seep through rock. I mined enough for dye and left a little seam in case the world liked being partly undiscovered. A skeleton rattled in a side corridor, but rather than charge, I pillared up 2 blocks, waited for it to wander clear, and sealed the gap with a tidy wall. Not everything requires victory. Some things only ask not to be invited. Deeper in, I found a geode cracked open like a quiet confession. Amethyst shards sang when my boots touched the blocks, thin chimes that made my shoulders drop. I harvested sparingly, then built a ring of stairs and a single sign. Sit. Listen. Leave better. I meant it for anyone, including the part of me that would forget. On the way back, gravel fell in a dusty sigh above my head and stopped just shy of trouble. I laughed alone, that half-disbelieving sound you make when almost becomes only a story. The torches led me out like patient ushers. When I emerged, evening had washed the birches in a soft gray. Bees tucked themselves into their hives like good thoughts finally gone to bed. I placed the amethyst by the cabin window so night wind could coax a note now and then, and I promised the mine shaft I'd bring that calm underground again. Tomorrow, I thought, rails. A gentle line to carry quiet farther than legs can. I crafted rails the way bakers braid dough, repeat a simple pattern until it becomes more than itself. Iron, stick, iron, then a few powered rails with redstone that glowed like small opinions. The first stretch began at the meadow bench and eased into the hill with a curve that respected roots. I placed a my cart and nudged it forward, then hopped in at a jog, laughing as the world decided to move for me. The ride wasn't fast, it was right. Cornflowers blurred into a soft ribbon, bees tagged in and out like cheerful attendants, and the bridge swept by with its lanterns confident in their modesty. At the cliff, I carved a short tunnel and braced it with oak beams, leaving windows to the river wherever the stone permitted. The cart clicked along, metal syllables speaking in rhythm about destinations that didn't demand applause. I built a small station outside the geode room and named it Listen. Then added a bench, a barrel with 3 loaves, and a spare shield that looked like it had already forgiven something. Back topside, I placed another station just past the hives and named it Pause. H arrived mid-hammer and rode the line twice, typing only, yes, the second time, which meant the shape of things had matched the intention. They added flower pots to the platforms and a bell that rang so softly you had to want to hear it. A new player drifted by, armor clanking like nerves on a first day. Their name tag read, Mara. They waved, then stood at the lectern on the bridge for a long time before writing. Found this by accident. Forgot how to breathe slow. Thank you. I pretended to fish while I read it twice. H placed a cake beside the note barrel, and I added a sign. Take a slice if you remembered lunch too late. The stations glowed at dusk like cordial invitations. I rode once more, just to make sure my own feet trusted the rails. They did, and the night, agreeing, unspooled without hurry. Days gathered like smooth stones. I planted a kitchen garden behind the cabin and lined the path with trapdoors that flipped into tidy borders, the kind of detail that looks like care even when no one else sees it. H experimented with moss carpets on the bridge approach until the ground felt like a sentence that kept its gentle rhythm. The book at the lectern began to collect voices, short lines, mostly. Left a lantern, took a breath. Fed the cows, felt quieter. Returned the loaf, kept the lesson. Reading them was like eavesdropping on the best version of town gossip. I started using lapis to dye banners for the stations. Pause, got a deep blue sail that moved in wind like a lake deciding not to be a mirror. Listen, wore a lighter shade, closer to morning. I hung the amethyst shards above the cabin door, and wired them to a note block with a redstone dusting so the bell chimed once at sunset. Mara built planters along the rails and asked in chat if slow lanes require tickets. H replied, only if you plan to rush. And Mara typed along, LOL, that felt like a loosening. Real life pressed, as it does. A work message piled 12 tasks into one paragraph, and I almost logged on that night with clenched jaw, ready to swing at stone until diamonds made the world simple again. Instead, I walked the bridge without touching my keyboard, letting my avatar idle in lantern light while I exhaled. When I finally moved, it was to place a single sign near the bench. Urgency can wait 5 minutes outside. It wasn't a rule, only a suggestion that felt like weather, a condition you could dress for. By the week's end, bees bumped against sunflower faces as if knocking politely to borrow sugar. The minecart line creaked with good use. Someone left a music disc in the barrel and wrote, for evenings that get noisy. We played it at low volume while the river performed its patient sermon. And when the moon rose blocky and bright, I felt the ordinary miracle of having nowhere else I needed to be. Tomorrow, I promised, I'd meet H by the shore and plan a pier where boats could learn to drift on purpose. We measured the pier with footsteps instead of numbers. H paced from the bridge to the widest stretch of bank and tapped the ground with a shovel the way conductors tap stands. Here, they said. Let the water write the rest. I laid spruce logs like punctuation, leaving gaps where the river could speak between planks. Trapdoors became edges that folded light into neat rectangles. We added a ladder into the shallows for swimmers who changed their mind halfway and a ring of campfires under the deck for that soft, smoky mirage of floorboards breathing. Halfway through, a player named Rook arrived in full diamond, sprinting circles that puffed dirt. We could farm this whole meadow, they wrote. Auto sugarcane, auto pumpkin, auto everything. Rates would be insane. They marked rectangles with cobble like blueprints for speed. The suggestion thudded into the quiet like a cart hitting an unpowered rail. I felt my shoulders tense. H typed first. Love efficient builds. Maybe we tuck them underground or across the river? Keep this strip for benches and bees. Rook paused long enough for me to worry they'd log off with a slammed door. Then, I can build quiet farms. A beat later they added, never tried. We walked together to a nearby cave mouth and sketched an Underhill greenhouse with glass ceilings that let sky pour through leaves. Rook's eyes, or at least their avatar's head, tracked the plan with growing interest. "We'll tune rates," they said, "but keep the surface unhurried." I typed, "A farm that feeds patience," and meant it both ways. By sundown, the pier reached a line of lily pads that arranged themselves like green ellipses, inviting more sentence later. We placed benches facing the water and a lectern with a second book titled, "Arrivals." First entry. "If you came here by accident, consider the river a good navigator." Rook left a redstone torch on the post and promised to return with designs that whispered. I watched their name fade into distance and felt a small pride at having asked for gentleness without apology. The pier drank the last light. The bees went home. And the minecart waited up the bank, a patient shuttle between choices I didn't have to make all at once. The Underhill greenhouse took shape like a thought returning until it finally asked to be believed. Rook framed spruce arches and floated panes of glass between them so daylight would slide down the hill in ribbons instead of glare. H quilted the floor in moss because bare stone felt too loud for roots trying to learn a language. I carved a slow stair that hugged the curve, tucking lanterns into leaf pockets so the light felt grown, not installed. When the first sugarcane clicked into its second block, the sound was small and perfectly right, like a quiet yes you didn't realize you'd been waiting for. We tuned the redstone like a band murmuring scales after doors open. Observers blinked at forgiving intervals. Water streams carried slices as if balancing trays in a calm cafe. Rook kept starting to do math, then catching themselves with a grin. "My farms are usually loud," they said. "This one hums." Each slid a tiny reading nook under a skylight, 2 stairs facing, a barrel between labeled, "Tools time." Players wandered in ones and twos, speaking softly without being told to. Mara set Lily of the Valley at the landing, like leaving a greeting where a greeting naturally belongs. Loon hung a crescent banner and wrote upstairs in the arrivals book. "Came in a hurry, leaving slower." At dusk I took the minecart. The track carried me between the meadows blue and the greenhouses green, past hives that breathed like gentle bellows. The world rolled by with the kind of authority only kindness manages. Back at the cabin I put a kettle beside the furnace because that corner asked for company. Outside, bees wrote commas into the evening, inviting the day to continue softly. I thought about logging off, then sat on the pier and let the river keep its patient argument with the pilings. The moon rehearsed being full. Tomorrow, I promised, I'd take a boat and follow the current until it suggested where a tiny, unnecessary, perfect build ought to live. At first light I launched, the boat's nose cutting water with the seriousness of a kid pretending to be a knife. H waved from the pier, then trotted along the bank for a while like a parent at a station platform. The current tugged me under the bridge, past the bend where cows gathered like opinionated clouds. The world stretched without shouting, just longer views, taller birches, a mountain trading snow for sky one cautious layer at a time. I trailed a fishing line for rhythm and let the bobber practice patience so I could copy it. An island appeared like a polite suggestion, 3 trees, a scribble of sandbar, a hill that looked exactly as tall as it meant to be. I circled once and listened. No hiss, no ravine sermon, only lap against shore and a gull somewhere that the game had never coded but my head supplied anyway. Unremarkable, which is to say perfect. I beached on the smallest crescent and named it, privately, Harbor of Later. I kept everything low. A short jetty. A chest labeled, Rest. A lectern with a blank book titled, Harbor Log. First line. Write only what you'd reread a year from now. Sugarcane along the south edge to whisper when wind remembered its job. A banner dyed the same blue as the bridge, so the place felt like cousin, not colony. Rook pinged. Need sandstone? I answered. Only if it wants to be here. They sent a stack anyway. I used 6 blocks and returned the rest, pleased at the feeling of having chosen enough. By afternoon H arrived with cake and shears. We trimmed leaf canopies until they framed the view instead of arguing with it. Mara built a low, honest cobble wall. Loon mapped the mouth and dotted gentle currents. When the sun browned the water, we lay on the jetty and let the sky take attendance. This wasn't a race. It was a picnic pretending to be a project. At dusk we left notes tucked where only the writer would find them again, pushed the boat off with a palm, and let wake lines erase our footprints without erasing the day. Traffic to the meadow grew the way good rumors do, quietly, then all at once. New signs appeared on the bridge with no one claiming credit. No leader, only caretakers. Take tools, leave stories. Someone built a honey-colored post office from shulker boxes, each labeled with a single word. Try, mend, share, rest. You left your gift where the feeling fit. I slid a mending book into. Mend. Felt silly, then not silly at all. Rook unveiled the greenhouse's second wing, silent pumpkins and melons gliding along carpeted channels, whispering toward collection chests. Rates are decent, they said, but the goal is mood. We ate slices on the pier like polite rebels. H found a fox asleep in wildflowers and fenced a ring, not to trap it but to keep us from stepping too close. Boundaries, they said, and left the gate open in case the fox wanted to teach escape. A server announcement flashed. Big showcase next week, fireworks, prizes for scale. The copy breathed exclamation points. Old reflexes tugged at me, build bigger, faster, louder. H's cursor hovered near mine at the bridge lectern. We don't have to compete, they typed. Before Insecurity could answer, I wrote back. Let's host something else the same night. Call it Open Bridge. Mara clapped in chat. Loon added. Bring a small promise. Rook said. I'll make the lanterns ripple like breath. The idea clicked into place as softly as a stare that finally matches stride. Planning felt like setting a table you hope friends will stay at too long. Low music. Honey bottles cooled in a snow chest. Boats for unplanned drifts. A lectern at the pier where people could write a promise, fold the page, and tuck it back for future selves. As the day approached, I kept checking the meadow, not to fix anything, only to confirm it still chose kindness when unsupervised. It did. The bees worked the sunflowers like librarians guiding patrons to exactly the shelf they needed and not one more. Open Bridge Day rose blue and steady. We chose ordinary chores on purpose, fed animals, replaced the chipped stair, retied banners that had learned to point at wind. Rook ran redstone for a lantern wave, testing until light traveled across the bridge like a shared breath. H placed chairs in small clusters instead of rows, trusting conversation to find its own edges. Mara baked, Loon tuned the rail timings until the my cart felt like gliding over a sentence with no hard consonants, and I wrote a welcome that fit in one page. If you came tired, keep your shoes on. If you came hurried, try our benches. If you came unsure, borrow a lantern. People arrived in trickles that never tried to turn into a crowd. A few peeled toward the official showcase, as they should. The rest settled with the surprised relief of folks who expected to be asked for something and weren't. We kept music low enough that River and B could keep their parts audible. Stories began about builds that failed but taught patience. A stranger placed a single diamond block with a sign. For emergencies, the kind that need courage more than gear. No one touched it. Somehow that felt like it worked. At dusk, Rook's wave began. Light lifted from one shore to the other, then returned, leaving time between passes wide enough to breathe twice. Applause happened at the only volume that fit. I took a boat with a player named K and drifted beneath the arch as squares of brightness slid overhead like reassurance. K said they'd logged on planning to grind and remembered they own an old film camera. I might fix it tomorrow, they typed, as if the decision needed a bridge to cross. Fireworks from the showcase smudged the horizon. Some faces turned to watch, then turned back. Not rejection, preference, exercised gently. The pier book gathered folded promises that looked private and brave. When night exhaled its last cool breath, we let the wave end and tucked the bridge in. I stood until the river recognized me again. This felt like winning without anyone else having to lose, and I wondered why that flavor isn't handed out more often in the worlds we make. The morning after Open Bridge felt like the quiet hallway after a concert, the notes still there, only folded small. I did rounds, checked hive levels, topped the bread barrel, straightened a sign that leaned like it had stayed up too late. The arrivals book held a new page. I forgot I could choose smaller. I am choosing smaller. I touched the corner like a lucky stone. Rook pinged to say the greenhouse had overproduced. We laughed at the idea of abundance being gentle. I composted what we wouldn't eat and felt rich anyway. Then real life leaned in. A message from my sister blinked. Could I fly up next weekend to help Dad clear the garage, sort the boxes Mom labeled but never opened again? The kind of request that travels with a backpack of ghosts. I stared at the cabin wall until the birch planks arranged themselves into patience. Yes, I typed back. I'll come. We'll take our time. The words steadied me, and I promised to practice here first. I built a small shed by the river for overflow, nothing fancy, only enough roof to shelter decisions. Inside, I placed 3 chests and labeled them with verbs. Keep, repair, let go. It felt almost silly to do in a game, which is how I knew it mattered. H wandered in and read the signs, then nodded once. Good room, they said. Rooms should teach. We stood there not speaking while the river proved endurance without boasting. Before logging off, I wrote a page for the bridge book titled, For Later. When you sort, be kind to the version of you that saved things. They were doing their best. I closed the lectern and felt the day fit. The shed door clicked, the hinges didn't hurry. I looked toward the pier, and the water returned my gaze with that patient, amused look rivers have when they've seen everything already. Tomorrow I'd pack. Tonight I'd memorize the sound of lanterns agreeing with dusk. Packing didn't require chests, it required a gait. I walked the world and chose what feelings to carry. The minecart's forgiving clatter, the greenhouse hum, the bee that bonked my sleeve like a shy hello. I brewed slow coffee, left a spare mug on the bench because future me might arrive early and need it, then rode the line to listen, and sat in the amethyst room until my breath matched the chime. Rook found me there and handed over a bundle, moss, a lantern, a banner dyed the bridges blue. For your dad's garage. They typed. Make a corner that understands. H met me at the pier with a boat stocked like a picnic, bread, shears, paper, a single flower pot. Write 1 word in the garage each hour. They said. Only nouns? Let the verbs come later. I laughed, because sometimes H's advice sounded like fortune cookies written by a gardener. But I knew I would do exactly that. We drifted under the wave-quiet arch where the lanterns slept and practiced not filling silence with purchase. On shore, Mara waved a stack of maps. I charted the river for strangers who get lost while trying to get found. They said, then tucked a copy into the post office under share. Loon left a little book of questions at pause, the kind you can answer without performing. What's the sound your day forgot? Who held a door for you? I copied 2 onto paper for the flight. Night lifted out of the water like steam. I wrote in the bridge book. Gone for a few days. Borrow the rails and return them as paths in your own places. Before quitting, I stood between the hives and listened to their sleepy industry. It felt like proof that work can be gentle when it aims at sweetness instead of spectacle. I saved and closed, and the menu music opened both hands the way it does when it forgives you for leaving. The garage smelled like dust deciding to be history. Dad stood beside a tower of boxes with the patience of a lighthouse, steady even when waves pretend at theater. We opened one labeled Misk, Winter, which is to say, memories that didn't want to be alone. I put H's flower pot on a shelf and planted the banner beside it, a scrap of blue that turned a corner into a small harbor. Nice, Dad said, which in his dialect meant, anchor accepted. We sorted, and every few minutes I wrote a noun on an index card and taped it to the wall. Gloves, letters, skates, toolbox. It slowed us just enough to notice the stories attached without being drowned by them. Keep, repair, let go. I told him, showing the categories like a recipe. He pointed at repair and grinned. My favorite verb. We fixed 1 hinge, tossed 3 rusted things, and kept the note that said where the better version now lived. It felt like the greenhouse, quiet flows, nothing wasted, purpose carrying itself. When we stopped for tea, he asked what I'd been building lately. I tried to explain the bridge wave, the benches, the promise pages, how people arrived tense and left with shoulders one brick lower. He nodded like he could see it without needing the map. "Your mother liked bridges," he said, and then didn't have to say anything else. We worked until evening turned the window into a mirror of two people who looked more alike than either of us would admit. Back at my sister's, I opened the notebook and wrote, "What's the sound my day forgot? Bees." And Dad laughing at a hinge that finally behaved. I missed the river's sermon but realized the garage had its own. Keep what helps, repair what wants another chance, let go without calling it failure. I slept hard, dreaming of rails that connected rooms where no one had to rush to deserve their seat. Tomorrow we'd finish the south wall, and I'd decide which verbs deserved another box. By the last afternoon, the garage had learned to speak in complete sentences. Labels sat square on shelves. Tools stood in respectful rows like a choir that had warmed up offstage. We found a shoebox of film negatives, and I messaged Kay, camera fixer of lanternlit vows. "Ship them," they replied. "I'll turn them into days you can hold." Dad tucked a photo of Mom into his wallet, and cleared his throat in that way that means both, "thank you," and, "let's not make this impossible." On the flight home I reread bridge pages I'd copied, promises folded like paper boats. Call my grandmother. Learn the slow recipe for stew. Touch grass without turning it into content. I wrote one more noun, home, and smiled at how the word expanded to include a pier, a greenhouse, a blue banner, and a weekday garage. When the wheels touched down, the runway lights looked like redstone torches agreeing to guide. I logged in as evening stretched itself, the cabin opening like a hand I knew. H was on the bench at pause, feet in the river, name tag steady. We traded short sentences about real life, garages, hinges, nouns. Then I walked the shed and added a fourth sign. Ask for help. Because sometimes the bravest category is admitting hands would make this go kinder. Mara appeared with sea pickles for underwater glow. Loon brought a book of the promises transcribed, names removed, in case the lectern ever emptied and needed to remember what it was for. Rook pinged from underground. I built a listening room off the greenhouse. No machinery. Just moss, candles, and a skylight that shows the moon only when it wants to. We visited and sat until breath remembered its old job. Before logging, we rode the wave once, lanterns lifting shore to shore like a taut lullaby. I went to bed in the real world with rails humming in my head. Tomorrow, I thought, maybe a small library where people can shelve the questions they don't need answered yet. The library grew under the bridge, inside the arch where echoes go to practice being kind. I shaped it with spruce and bookcases, left gaps where river light could translate itself into readable. Instead of an enchantment table, I set a plain lectern and a chest labeled Borrowed Courage. Inside, shields, spare boots, a cake, a sign that said, Here, try again. H crafted reading nooks out of stairs and trapdoors like whispered parentheses. Mara painted a map of the local biome and hung it upside down on purpose. Sometimes you need the path to surprise you, they said. We wrote our own classification system, shelves by feeling, not topic. Curiosity next to rest. Repair across from boundaries. There were only a few books at first, a journal of small recipes, a guide to moss maintenance. 50 ways to say not today politely. People added more. Loon's favorite became How to switch tracks without apology. Kay delivered scans of the negatives. I printed one of Mom and Dad laughing on a pier that wasn't ours and titled it Wave 1987. The picture watched the door like it knew exactly why we built benches. Rook arrived with a redstone contraption in their hands and then put it away. Not here, they said, smiling, and I hugged them without avatars touching. The minecart line got a spur to the library platform, rails muffled with carpet so arrival sounded like a soft decision. At dusk, the lantern wave passed overhead and the shelves caught a little halo that made even empty spaces look like they were holding seats. I borrowed a shield from Courage and left a loaf, then wrote in the margin of a book under repair. Some things break into better shapes. When I climbed back to the bridge, the river had composed new sentences around the pilings, and I read them the way you read a friend's text, knowing meaning will keep unfolding if you let it. Tomorrow, maybe benches along the far shore so the wave can meet another set of eyes halfway. We crossed to the far shore with a pocket expedition, 4 planks, 2 lanterns, 0 urgency. The ground there had been mostly untouched, a slope of grass that didn't know it would soon be asked to host chairs. I tested the soil with a shovel as if it could tell me its opinions. Satisfied, I set the first bench at an angle that faced both bridge and sky, the way you arrange seats when you want people to look at each other and something larger at once. H strung lanterns between birches in a line that refused to be perfectly straight. "Let light meander," they said, and the trees nodded like they'd been trying to teach that lesson forever. Mara placed a stone circle for small talks. Loon added a wicker of paths that melted into grass rather than scolding it. Rook stamped a sign with a new rule we didn't need but liked anyway. "No leader, still no leader." We named the place, Across, and laughed at how obvious the name was and how right. The first evening, only a handful came, and that was plenty. We watched the wave travel from original shore to here, then turn around, a conversation that needed both mouths to be itself. In the library, I tucked a final picture, Dad's hands holding the hinge we mended, beside. "Repair." I sent Kay a screenshot of the benches and got back a message. "Your camera is working." I stood between shores and felt my weak align. The garage, the banner, the nouns on a wall, the chime of amethyst deciding to be a teacher instead of a rock. When night laid its careful palm over the meadow, I wrote a line in the bridge book. "If you arrive with a heavy bag, leave 1 stone under the bench. The river knows how to carry." I watched the current acknowledge the assignment with its usual humble competence. Then I closed the book, let the wave pass once more, and promised the world I'd keep choosing smaller where smaller holds more. Tomorrow, I thought, a gentle harvest. After that, a day with no plans at all, which is its own kind of build. Harvest day arrived without trumpet or scoreboard. I walked the rows with empty hands first, like greeting neighbors before borrowing sugar. Pumpkins blinked out of vines, modest little moons. Wheat bowed where wind had been kind. Bees threaded the air with gold cursive. I sheared only what regrew smiling. Rook showed me how to feather the timings so water nudged produce instead of shoving. We stored plenty and left more on the shelf than mathematics required, because enough prefers to travel. At the pier, Kay waited with a box of prints. We pinned a handful under the bridge. The lantern wave caught mid-arc, the fox deciding to trust morning, Dad's hinge obeying gravity with dignity. People stopped, looked, and then looked longer. "You can hear these," Mara whispered, and I knew what they meant. H placed a sign beside the photos. "No captions. Find your own." Afternoon clouds unrolled like calm intentions. Loon hosted a tiny workshop on planting questions, and sent everyone away with one they weren't required to answer. Where do I keep setting speed traps for myself? I walked the rails and found 3. Habits of reaching for more when good was already in the room. I put a torch at each spot, not to warn, but to remember. Evening drew the shade. I sat by the amethyst window and tuned a note block until the chime matched the clink of bottles in the honey chest. H arrived, quiet as a solved riddle, and we shared cake with the understanding that sweetness is a verb. "Tomorrow," they typed. "No building. Just use." I nodded at the screen like a person being seen through it. The river agreed by doing exactly what it always does and never bragging about it. Using day meant no improvements, no lists, no sneaky. Just one stair fix. We rode the line from pause to listen, stepped off, stood still, and let the geode speak. The chime echoed off moss, found skin, and kept going. I realized I'd started measuring time in breaths between notes. H laughed when I said it and adopted the unit immediately. We logged the day in the harbor book with a single sentence. We did less and found more. Mara led a drift club, boats unsteered on purpose, oars resting while current chose translation. Nobody bumped anything we couldn't apologize for. Rook tried to calculate average velocity. We confiscated their calculator and paid them back with a jar of honey. Loon read aloud from the library's Boundaries shelf, a chapter called Saying no so you can mean yes. We practiced in chat. No to rush, yes to rails. No to scores, yes to stories. The server carried those lines like lanterns strung across distance. Midday, a thunderstorm lumbered in. We didn't sleep through it or fight it. We watched lightning thread the mountain and counted patiently. After, the greenhouse steamed like tea poured back into leaves. I wiped fog from a pane and saw my reflection looking less like a task list and more like a person on purpose. At dusk we climbed across and listened to night install itself, careful and thorough. Kay snapped a photo of the exact moment the first star cleared a birch. You'll hear this later, they said, and I believed them. I logged off early, held the day like a warm cup, and promised to return it to the world without spilling. Tomorrow could be repairs, even gentleness chips. But tonight, one more breath, then two. Repair day revealed the hairline fractures kindness accumulates doing its humble work. A stair squeaked, a fence leaned, a chest lid protested like an elderly joint. We moved slow with tools that preferred conversation over conquest. I renamed my anvil, thank you, and found myself saying it out loud each time the ring blessed a mend. H extended the shed with a tiny eave so rain would arrive polite. Rooks slipped in new rails where gravel had learned to grumble, cushioning clicks with carpet like laying manners under machinery. A new player, Sable, arrived whispering apologies as if entry required them. They'd bounced off louder servers and were wary of rules disguised as smiles. I walked them to the bridge book and let them read before saying anything. Their posture changed at line 3. Return when you can or don't. We trust you. They borrowed a wooden hoe and treated it like an heirloom. By afternoon they'd repaired 3 paths no one had asked about, then wrote in arrivals. Found a place that doesn't tally me. We ran a lighting audit at sundown, following shadows with lanterns like nurses changing gauze. I loved the small bravado of torches along the river, how they refused drama and still kept monsters at a kind distance. In the library, someone shelved a zine titled, The Gentle Fixer's Field Guide. I doggered a page on, leaving a flaw that helps you remember you're not a machine. I stared at a misaligned trapdoor and decided to keep it. Night sauntered in. I placed one final sign on the pier. You are welcome to arrive late. The river looked pleased with itself. The bees snored in hexagons. H slid a loaf into, borrowed courage, and took nothing back. We stood in the arch and let the wave pass once. Tomorrow, Rook said, we might try a distant spur line to a birch grove where mornings go to practice. A good idea can wait, ours did, chuckling. The spur line curled along the river's outside edge, a respectful distance from reeds where frogs argued cheerfully about nothing. We built viewing cutouts, 2-block balconies tucked into the bank so riders could step off and watch water turn corners without asking permission. Sable carved gentle stairs through a small rise and labeled each landing with words instead of numbers. Still wider enough. I watched 3 travelers pause at enough, exhale, and forget what they'd planned to say. We reached the birch grove near noon. Light dappled the ground in patient pixels. H strung low bells between trunks, tuned to the meadow's wind. Rook buried a redstone clock that pulsed rarely, just enough to make the bells remember they were alive. I set a table with shears, chalk, white carpet, and paper for leaf rubbings no GUI would ever require but some hands might. Loon built a tiny kiosk labeled, Trade a worry for a word, and stocked it with scraps that said, Okay, later, kind. People returned with empty palms and pocketed permission. On the ride back, the car's hum synced with my breath again. The world offered me its thesis in small examples, curved rails to fit terrain, not the other way, pace lanterns for walking, not sprinting, let benches face something that teaches scale. By the bridge, Kay had hung a new photo, the Underhill greenhouse reflected in a raindrop on glass. It looked like a universe auditioning for softness. I left a note in the harbor log. The river rounded a bend and didn't apologize to geometry. Then I added one more station banner, dyed with our blue, and wrote, Mornings, in letters just crooked enough to qualify as human. The wave crossed both shores at dusk and returned with a patience that didn't need witnesses. Tomorrow, maybe quiet chores. Or maybe nothing. I was getting braver at leaving blanks. Quiet chores found us, as they do. I stalked. Borrowed courage. Sharpened 2 hoes, tucked spare boats under the pier like kindly commas. H repaired the path where feet had learned to favor the same square. They widened it by 1 block and smiled at how generosity can be measured in a single line. Mara weeded with the joyful ruthlessness of someone freeing sentences from too many adjectives. Rook surprised us with a tool we didn't know we needed, a gentle comparator, that dimmed lanterns when the moon was bright enough to carry her share. We cheered like a small town at a softball game. I walked the line one last time before night clicked into place, letting the rails decide my pace. At mornings, the banner lifted in a breeze I didn't need to measure. The gentle comparator blinked once, moon bright enough, lanterns softened without sulking. From the bridge, the bells in the birch grove answered with 3 careful breaths of sound. We didn't build anything else. We just stood where the day had put us and watched the river keep its promise to turn when turning was right. I slid a loaf into borrowed courage and took nothing back. H set a boat nose out from the pier, then didn't push it, because not leaving is also a way to travel. When the wave crossed and returned, it felt less like a show and more like a heartbeat we could hear now. Enough. I said, not to end the work, but to name it correctly. And the meadow, satisfied, dimmed itself to listening,